All right, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Kate Schlesinger, the Retail Solutions Advisor for the Center for Professional Executive Development. I'm excited for you to be with us here today. We're really excited to have some amazing minds featured as panelists today to talk about a really cool topic around customer centricity and marketing strategy. But before I get going and introduce everybody, I want to tell you a little bit about the Wisconsin School of Business and our Center for Professional Executive Development, also called CPED. So CPED offers programs and certificates that give you that modern, relevant skill set that's needed to help you advance your career. All of our programs offer interactive learning sessions facilitated by our instructors with practical business experience. CPED also partners with organizations to just provide customized programming to help you do exactly what you need at your organization, whether that be development programs, coaching, or consulting. So I encourage you to reach out, visit our website. You've probably learned about us already. I have many Badger alumni on here today, which is great. So welcome back, and want to walk through just a few logistics as we get started. So you'll see across the top of your screen there a chat function or a Q&A. This is a panel, so we are going to expect to see some interaction and want to hear from you, but the format doesn't allow for us to actually allow you to talk or see each other. So you'll see the panelists, but we can't actually see you. So that's how we're going to make sure that we can have you ask those questions. I thank you in advance. Many of you during the registration process submitted questions, so those are the questions we are going to start off with. But again, if you want to ask a question, you can use the QA button or the chat. We will be recording this session as well. So if you are not able to join today or you want to share this with your colleagues after the session, that will be available to you in a few days. So with that, I'm really excited to share with you our panelists for today. These are some of the best minds in this space, and I'm really excited that we are able to bring them to you today. So first off is Michael Johnson. Michael is a professor. He's actually the marketing department chair, so not just a professor, the department chair at the Wisconsin School of Business. He's published over 100 academic articles and industry reports, as well as authored 5 books over the course of his career. He's also a consultant and has consulted over 20 different industries during his career. Next is Laura Hensen. She is the Executive Director of the Office of Strategic Partnerships and the Kohl Center for Retailing at UW-Madison's School of Human Ecology. Laura comes to her current role from the career in merchandising, leading teams at both Land's End and Target. And then last but not least is Kelly Bernal. She's a visionary product leader, a storyteller, a connector. She's been able to seamlessly integrate strategic product direction with a customer-centric mindset. She's a strong professional background in retailing, including very notable brands such as Gap, Inc., Portfolio, Land's End, Dockers, and now her current role at Torrid. So before we get started and asking and diving into your questions, I just want to hear a little bit from each of you. So Michael, could you just give a little bit more about your background?
Sure. Well, I was an undergraduate here at Wisconsin just a few years ago. Absolutely. I was over in the Arts College, though, and made my way to business schools. I went to graduate school down the road here at the University of Chicago. Long story short, I spent 24 years at Michigan in the Ross School there as a marketing professor, 15 years in higher ed administration, but my love for teaching and research brought me back to my alma mater. My research focus is marketing strategy, consumer behavior, and a topic we're going to discuss, which we call customer portfolio management. So how does a retailer manage a whole portfolio of customers?
Thank you, Michael. Laura, how about a little bit more about you?
Yes, thank you, Kate, for having me here today. I'm really excited to be here to talk about this. Prior to my role at the university, I did have a career in merchandising. I'm at Target and Land's End. And I'm also a Badger like Michael. So I was a marketing major in Bachelor of Business Administration at the School of Business. And in my role now, today, I'm really leveraging my experience to build partnerships with organizations to really bring in and drive impactful student learning opportunities and building pathways to careers when students leave, and specifically in the retail industry. So I'm really excited to be here, Kate. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. And last but not least, Kelly.
Thank you so much, Kate. It's great to be here. And Laura and Michael, it's great to be on the panel with you. Um, I, love retail. I love what I do. I'm very passionate about product and product experiences. I've been in the industry for quite a long time. I started my career, as Kate had mentioned, at Gap Inc., and I've worked across their portfolio of brands before leaving the company and working for other organizations that are all they all have very strong purposes and heritages where we focus on delighting the customer and bringing experiences and product to them. The customer is always number one. And so I'm really excited to have conversations about what that means and what that looks like in our industry. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. So again, this panel is for all of you to engage. I see there's so many that have joined us today, which we're very grateful for. And I really want to just take the time to address first and foremost the questions, but your questions of Kelly, Laura, and Michael are going to be what are going to help make this very interactive. So let's just kick it off and actually dive right into it. What do we really mean by being customer-centric in a retail marketing context? What does it really involve? And maybe Michael, we'll start off with you.
Well, sure. We can think of it as, and I'd love to hear what, our current and former practitioners have to say on this topic because they're living it. But I think conceptually, the way we've always thought about it in marketing and the way we teach it is, and I sometimes use the term customer orientation. How much do we orient on customers? And we can get into some of the specifics of what we mean by centricity in a little bit, but usually it involves, getting very good customer insight, being very knowledgeable about your customers, having good customer information systems, good database systems, CRM systems, understanding that taking a customer orientation is not just a marketing function. It's something that cuts across the whole organization. So the second step is usually to make sure that you disseminate this information. I have a Swedish friend who actually I started working with him. He's an engineer. His name is Anders Gustafsson, and he and I have done a lot of work for IKEA, and excuse me, as a retailer. And it's all about how you take information about the customer and put it in the hands of people who are going to drive the product and process change in a company. So, those are sort of the three steps, how you understand the customer, how you make sure you share that information in the organization, and you follow through with it with product and process change. But I will also say, I for many years I taught a services course in Michigan, and that got me into what's different about service and service retailers. And it also requires a very strong culture. I think, Kelly and Laura are likely to get into these topics, but when you look at companies like, we do an IKEA case in the classes here, IKEA has a very strong culture. We'll talk later about Amazon. They have a very strong customer-centric culture. Even, your local Trader Joe's has a very strong culture. If you've ever asked their employees a question, you ask a Trader Joe's employee a question, they own the question and they will answer it for you, no matter what it involves. So at least that, in my view, is some of what it means from a general perspective.
Very good. Well, Kelly, since you brought up industry, let's jump over to you. What does it mean for you to be customer-centric in your role, and what does it really involve?
I think if we really break it down to the simplest form of how we approach it, just being in the industry, it's really about building those relationships with the customer. I think Michael touched on the need to have, data and all the right tools to analyze and understand your customer, but it's about finding and taking that information and building that relationship to know who they are and to be a part of a journey and really building that community that they want to engage and involve with you as a brand. And that's really the foundation of how you start all your work. And then you use the data and all of the information you can get to understand the different segments of your customer base and all of the things that you can do to engage with them and to drive whatever activation you're trying to do with them.
Excellent, excellent. So Laura, you're kind of living in both worlds, right? So you're fresh out of industry, now you've come over to campus. How does customer centricity work for you now that you're kind of thinking about how it really plays out? How do you teach it? How do you get people ready to really think about it in its most practical sense.
Well, and I think what Michael and Kelly said, I would echo and add just this layer of detail too. I think when people think about customers, sometimes it's easy to look at demographic data, right? So I'll speak to like kind of the layers of data gathering. So, you know, how old are they? What's their gender? Where do they live? And some, you know, retailers stop at that level. But really it's about, you know, if you think about those demographic points, people have really different experiences, even if they're the same age, the same gender, and live in the same location. So it's really important to understand where are people in their life stage, their lifestyle, and their behaviors, and really understanding what problems exist for them, right? So when you create relationship, how can I, as an organization, solve my consumers' problems? If I can solve my consumers' problems, then there's a mutual benefit there, and there's a connectivity that's stronger than just a transaction. And then how do you engage and keep engaging further from there?
Yeah, I really like that. I love the concept of relationships too, Kelly, that you mentioned, and how you're kind of looking at each customer has to have its own lens, right? So I've kind of heard that some view customer centricity as a strategy that they're focusing primarily on those highest value customers, right? The biggest tickets, the biggest spenders. What are the limitations of this approach? And let's just start with the limitations. What do you think are the limitations that might exist within this? Who wants to take this one first?
Well, I have a strong view on it, so I don't want to go first.
I'll be happy to go first on that one. I think it's interesting because I think, you know, you do want to focus, you do want to do something for the customers that are your high value customers, but those are usually a small subset and they're already highly engaged with the brand. So they love you, they want to be a part of what you do. And so it can impact and limit the growth potential that you have with your customer base. And there's more customers in lower down in that funnel from the high to the mid, where you have a much bigger pool and you have to actually start to understand them a little bit differently. I think Laura touched on that. What makes each of them move? What makes them, you know, what solves their problems? What are they engaging in? What are they interested in? And how do you bring them along in order to drive the growth? Because then you end up with a file size and a customer base that is, you know, 10% of highly engaged and the rest are just coming and going as is, and you're just not building that relationship. You're not connecting with them, and you end up not knowing who they are, and you're struggling to actually achieve objectives and goals you've set in your business by not being able to reach them. But I'm curious to hear Michael's opinion too on this.
Well, okay, I'll go
Laura,
ahead.
you want to jump in before Michael? Okay.
No, I think my point to add to that is that there is probably so much opportunity in that mid-range that why aren't they higher value consumers? So what's that reason? And then brands have to ask themselves, am I willing to solve that reason? Does that exist within my values, the way we want to work, all of those things, right? Because there may be some, probably not mid, but other consumers that aren't highly engaged, probably for a reason, maybe for things that you don't want to do as a business. So I think that's really important to put it through your, you know, brand filter to make sure that you're staying true to who you are. So that would be what I would add onto that.
Well, they both set me up well, because, you know, one of the downsides of what has become called customer centricity, there's a very good marketing professor at Wharton named Pete Fader who's done a lot of work in this area. But when people have looked at the work, when some practitioners have looked at the work, they sort of say, what's our number one value customer, number two, number three, whatever our most high value customers, and they tend to focus just on those high value customers. Well, LL Bean tried this decades ago when they realized that 80% of their profits were coming from 20% of their customers. They started focusing on those customers, and they woke up 5 years later with a smaller business. So they weren't bringing anybody in the front door, you know, and even your most loyal customers eventually leave. You know, they stop buying the tents and the boots from LL Bean and they move on to other parts of their lives. Even the most loyal Delta airline or Marriott hotel customer eventually stops traveling so much. So you have to have a way to keep bringing new customers in the front door. And transitioning, Kelly and Laura alluded to this, that you have to have ways of moving them along in that relationship continuum. So we tend to do a segmentation of customers that starts with the strength of the relationship. So are we dealing with acquaintances, friends, or partners? The partners are our best customers. They're embedded in our brand communities. But yeah, we still need the acquaintances because they give us scale economies. Without your acquaintances, you can't run the business at the size that you want to run it. And you have no source of future loyal customers. So we started doing some studies in the business to business area years ago and realized that business to business companies, this came to them just naturally. They were naturally segmenting their customers into these different relationship segments. But now with the advent where these retailers are becoming moving towards more of an omni-channel type of marketing and developing digital platforms, end user consumers are also embedding themselves more in systems and processes. So there's opportunities to take these acquaintances and move them to become friends and partners. So it's a balance across these things that's really important. I saw something on customer centricity recently where a practitioner, was taking a look at what is very valid work, and our own research has shown over time that your most satisfied loyal customers are your most profitable customers. But unfortunately, the implication they say is we don't have to pay any attention to the acquaintances. As one person put it, you give them the attention they deserve, which is close to nothing. And that's a bad strategy, in my view. And so it's really refreshing to hear the practitioners say that's exactly what they worry about. You got your loyal customers, but you always have to worry about who's going to be the next loyal customer.
Yeah, excellent point. Thank you, Michael. So you kind of brought up another strategy, kind of taking this shift from acquaintances to stronger partnerships. What are some other ways, Kelly or Laura, that you have seen a way to manage an entire portfolio? So you're not necessarily leaning in just to those high value customers, the entire portfolio. How have you seen that work and play out?
I think in any business today that I've worked in, we really have to make sure that we have segmentation opportunities so that you reach the broad customer and you're really true to, I think Laura touched on it, who is your brand and what are they about? And what are you how are you speaking to the customer, and making sure that you're hitting on that in every segment. And then for those customers and to focus on those people you want to bring in more on the acquaintance side, there are different channels now that you can speak to customers differently. You can engage with them across different channels and different segments. And, there's so many aspects with TikTok, with Instagram, with the new threads, with what's happening, just looking at Reddit, and how customers are engaging and building a community for your brand. Your brand is so much bigger than just what it used to be, which was, the box that it was sitting in, and then its customer base that was sitting outside. Now there are all these little cohorts of your brand moving about the universe. And so finding a way to just be open and start that dialogue and communicate with them in different ways, it can be really helpful because you can engage that acquaintance and make them, a friend or a partner, and not even realize it. You're just touching them in a different way based on the data and insights and the conversations they're starting on their own.
Laura, do you have anything to add to that? Any other ideas?
I think, when you are engaging, just having a really authentic voice, it touches on being authentic to your brand, but really in relationship. So I think it's really interesting. Kelly mentioned TikTok, to see certain brands engaging on TikTok now in a very conversational way, right? So they are commenting on people's posts like a friend. And it's creating this buzz and this interest, and it's specific to their customer base in line with their brand, but it's creating this kind of surprise and humanizing a brand and engaging with them where they are. And I think that is a really interesting example of creating community, creating relationship, being authentic, and that kind of surprise and delight that we always talk about in merchandising that you want to create, and that kind of excitement.
Yeah. So I have a personal experience that I want to share and see and get some reaction to. Oh, go ahead, Michael. Did you want to?
I was just saying, it's not about brand communities. The interesting thing about them is they can be a huge plus, but you can't always control them. You know?
Right.
Right.
Yes.
So we were talking the other day with students about Jeep, and they've had sort of two recent things lately. You know, they used to have a big Jeep rally, the Jeep community, the Jeep Clubs of America would meet in Galveston, Texas. Well, this last summer, about 280 of them got arrested on the beach for disorderly conduct. You know, so that's all over the news. And so Jeep wants to, quote unquote, disassociate themselves from this, but they can't. It's a Jeep event. And then shortly after that, some of you may have heard of Duck Duck Jeep. I don't know if you've heard of that, but there's this thing going around now among Jeep users in their community that if a Canadian woman started this, that if you love someone else's Jeep, you put a little rubber duck on the hood. So when people come to community events together, they show off their collection of rubber ducks. And so if you Google Duck Duck Jeep, you'll start seeing this. So these things are starting to become fascinating, and the social media aspects of them are things that I have companies wanting to hire our new students, because this generation of students knows far more about it than I ever will.
Yes. So we have a question that did just come in from one of the participants, but it sort of ties to also the personal story I wanted to share. Was that I actually made a post about a big mirror that I had bought at Restoration Hardware. I was loving it, and I tagged them, and they actually reached out to me and said, could I share this? And it did make me feel really special and really change my perspective on how I engage with that brand. So I think that that's an interesting focus. And I guess before we get to the participant specific question, I want to just kind of lean into that. How do you manage that social media side of it? So you heard about the Duck Duck Jeep, which is fairly innocent. We heard about the Beach Jeep. My example of just posting a product and then having them reach out and thank me for doing that and ask if they could reshare it on their channels. How do you manage that strategy? Is it too big to really get your arms around, or how is that sort of set up in most typical retail organizations?
I'd be very interested.
Take that.
Companies like Land's End and Gap and other companies, Target, do this.
Usually, go ahead, Kelly.
No, go ahead, Laura, please.
No, I was just going to say, I think usually it can sit within the marketing department umbrella, and, maybe within, public relations. And there are, I think, growing team members and businesses are trying to figure out this space, because a lot of it's new and it's ever changing. And Michael, you're right. A lot of young talent, people are trying to bring young talent in to translate, to figure this out. And I think everybody's kind of figuring it out, right? Like as things are evolving and as technology is evolving, I think there are probably some best practices that exist out there, and yet those can start to change, right? Because it is evolving, and you're right, there is this aspect of you can't necessarily control, and maybe that's okay also, right? Because it's authentic to this community that's happening. So I think you have to think through again, that idea of like, what do we want to make sure we communicate that comes from our brand out, and that we feel really good about that, and that sometimes things might happen around that, and that is part of that community that interacts with us, but that's not necessarily in our control. And so in some ways, do you even try to control that? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it does. I think it's a hard topic too, because you don't want to lose your authenticity by quieting, right? The culture. And Michael, I think you talked about the culture and how important culture is in brands and in businesses, and especially on the marketing front. But there is also a community and culture with your customers that sometimes they drive part of the culture and what's happening. And so, you have to balance it. And you see some brands on one side who are very vocal and choose to become a part and respond to and answer and activate and message. And then there are some brands who choose to not comment, not participate in those conversations. But I think it's a fine line and a balance, especially with transparency being so important in the world today, and what digital space has created with the ability to get information by just tapping your fingers on a screen, and all of a sudden you have encyclopedias and massive amounts of information at your fingertips. So, it's important to kind of balance both of those universes as you're thinking about it, and determining if I'm going to reply with your PR team, your marketing team, your legal team, whoever you're partnering with. Is this moving our brand forward? Is it just because we want to stop the noise that's happening? Or is it because we're afraid of something, right? And you don't want to act out of fear. You want to act out of authenticity to your brand and in the messaging that you have. So, every brand is a little bit different in the things that I've followed. And, Michael, I love that you talked about the Jeep pieces. I read about that. And I had a friend who has a Jeep, and they have the ducks. And I was like, why do you have all these ducks on your thing? It was odd. I wasn't expecting to see that, from this family. So it's interesting, but it's real. And, now it's, how do you take that to the next level, and what do you do? And that's each brand's moment to decide how they want to participate in that piece of the conversation.
I think where it
I
starts.
love that. So go ahead.
No, I think where it starts to interesting, but also dicey. So we're doing a study on brand adaptation, and we're just in sort of preliminary interviews with customers. And, this customers, somehow we got into topics about brands commenting on political issues that are going on. And, and there's famous, Harvard's already written case studies about Coca-Cola on their stand on some of these issues, and the blowback that can happen. And what was interesting is some of these consumers saying, I don't want my brands doing this. I don't want to be made to feel bad because I may be on the other side of a political divide when a brand takes a stand. So I think that's one of the more interesting questions we're facing right now. I have no idea where it's going, but I think, brands thought this may have been a good idea, and now they're taking a second look.
I think that's an interesting point too, Michael, because there is that realness in what we deal with today on the cancel culture, right? And that part of the choice to be a part of that conversation or not really can create a polarization in how people want to be a part of your brand or not. And that's a challenge. And I wonder, not having had that direct experience in my brand recently, if it's something that then just helps the brand evolve in a different way, right? Does it change your customer base? Does it change how you engage with the customer? How do you rebuild from that? And you can see it on the celebrity side and in entertainment. People polarize themselves. They are canceled all the time, and they're able to then reinvent themselves in new ways and, market themselves down a different path and rehabilitation and all of those things. So you think, gee, there might be something interesting there to understand. I'm fascinated by that study. It'll be interesting to see what you learn as you take that back and work through that.
Some big brands. I mean, Bud Light, Target has been through this lens lately. So I think a lot of us are struggling with what the right answer is.
I think it's right. So now this has just really kept building this great panel, this question from the crowd. And I think now you can have a couple of different ways of thinking about it. But the question is do you have advice for building commitment to customer engagement strategies within your organization, particularly for store line associates? So those people that work for you within your stores, how can you get them to be committed to, supporting those social media campaigns and potentially, all the dynamics that make them unique? So what advice do you have?
That's a really good question. And I think, communication is key, and making sure they understand the brand's purpose and vision and what they're setting out to achieve. And making sure there's clarity there and that they support and align to that, right? Most people don't want to work for a brand unless they have some kind of connection. So they are already connected if they're working in stores as the front line to the customer base. And they can evolve as they're in there as well. But I think it's really important to communicate clearly to them what you're trying to do, why you're trying to do it, and to have that open dialogue with them. Because usually they're the most passionate and the most the most connected to the customer every day. And they're the ones with the best information because they can feed back to you what the customer's saying, what they like, what they don't. For the ones that don't want to engage in the media channels, right? And they don't know how to give feedback besides writing a review on your product, they're able to talk to the sales team and say, hey, these are the things that are going on. And there might be some that kind of veer outside of that. And then, you have to kind of address that. But I think starting from a place of open dialogue and communication with the store team and making sure they're clear and they want to be a part of what you're doing, right? I've had the opportunity to work for brands where everyone is so passionate about their brand and what it does and how it serves the customer in different ways. And each brand I've been with has been slightly different, right? Their purpose and their mission is slightly different and their reach is slightly different. But everybody engaged in that process on the store side with thousands of stores in some, and to the other side with very few stores, they know everything about the brand, about the customer, about, the products that are coming. They want to talk about more. They have wonderful ideas to share. So it's giving them opportunity to do that and finding a space for them to do that and making sure that it's two-sided, two ways, from my experience.
Excellent advice. Michael, what advice do you have to help get that in-store employee?
It plays very well into what Kelly said. I start my strategy classes by sort of creating a distinction between traditional manufacturing firms and service firms and service retail firms. And I say, in a manufacturing firm, you can have strategy drive culture. If you're General Foods or you're General Motors, you can, if you want a high quality platform product, medium quality, value driven, you can go find people in marketing and operations and manufacturing and innovation to do that. In a service organization, the strategy doesn't drive the culture drives the strategy. So the culture you create with your associates, and this doesn't translate well from Swedish, but in a case like IKEA, it's a culture of cheapness. Is how do we constantly, and it means outstanding value. How do we keep finding ways to get the customer involved in the actual service production process? I mean, where else do you actually have to sort of drive all the way to Milwaukee or Chicago from Madison, take the seats out of the minivan, pick everything out yourself, take it home and put it together yourself? But by doing that, this culture that a place like IKEA has created has associates that are very consistent with what the customer is trying to achieve. And it holds the same at the other end of the price spectrum. I spent 10 years at the Cornell Hotel School, so we studied a lot of hotel brands. And at Ritz-Carlton hotels, the employees are ladies and gentlemen serving ladies and gentlemen. They're serving an affluent clientele, but we treat our employees with respect and give them responsibility. And that drives their ability to deliver customer service. So I think that connection, that it actually starts with the culture and the staff that you create. And that's going to determine the market segment you're going to be able to look at and focus on.
I love that. So Laura, I want to shift over to you because I think you sit in such a cool spot. So you have experience at both Target and Land's End. So, I think I follow about 5 or 6 different Target style influencer accounts on Instagram myself personally too, to kind of see what's in the stores, what's in there on a regular basis. But you're also at the retailing center where you're working with students that are digital natives, right? So they have come in, this is how they communicate. How do you think they are responding? How are you using any advice kind of when you think about how you're teaching in this and how you're helping prepare the future retailers and future marketers?
Yeah, I think what's interesting is Kelly mentioned this a little bit earlier, but there's this web of kind of interactions. And I think it can be easy to kind of get spread out and kind of get lost in kind of all of the ways to engage. And so then that's why I think it's important to just really be clear on what you want to focus on, what you want to message, and then you tailor that slightly depending on where you want to engage. But I think this digital native group is really well versed and knows a lot of those channels and knows the audiences. And I think you have to ask yourself too, when you're engaging on certain platforms, who's the audience there? Because, you know, myself, right, I have a LinkedIn page, I have an Instagram, I have a TikTok account that I don't post on, but I consume. When I'm in those different spaces, there's a different reason for why I'm there, even though it's still me and I have the same lifestyle and the same behaviors. I'm engaging with them for different reasons. So I think you have to think through, okay, these are the messages my brand tells. And when I engage on this platform, what's the lens that I put that through, so that that's easy for customers to understand. It feels natural, and yet it's still consistent with what I'm trying to do, and it still is achieving what they're trying to go to that platform for. So I think it's just knowing the channels and why they exist and how you put your filter through. But this digital native group has a deeper understanding of those channels. And I think we all do to some degree too, right? And we all can participate in that, you know, why does that channel exist and how does it serve our customer base?
Absolutely. Thank you, Laura. So Michael, you've teased us a couple of times with some talk about IKEA, but you teased us and talked about Amazon. And so I think I would love to kind of get your sense on a benchmark for customer centricity and more of an e-commerce, omni-channel retailing experience. So what can other retailers learn from what you've heard about Amazon and the successes that they've had?
Well, Amazon, of course, is an unbelievable success story. You know, they have, you know, hundreds of $billions in revenue, over 300 million customers. You know, and it wasn't too many years ago, they were just selling books, you know, online. You know, they've grown tremendously. But it all starts with the CEO, Jeff Bezos, who is amazingly customer focused. It's really interesting, sort of, we just talked about cultures, and, you know, there's, you know, things written lately about the burnout culture at Amazon. The people work very hard there. But they're very focused on the customer and customer-centric. He views it as a competitive advantage. He views it as part of his value proposition. And he uses it in his positioning, you know, to customers. But I think what's most interesting to me about Amazon is how, from a marketing standpoint, they use some very tried and true marketing tools. A lot of what they do is nothing new. But then what they're adding to it is very modern data analytic techniques. You know, so if you look at how they manage customers over time, they use very traditional models we would call awareness, trial, repeat models. They're constantly finding ways to attract customers to their website, get them to search material, you know, look at a book or read product reviews, to make that first purchase or make a purchase they haven't made in a while. So they're using a tried and true model. Once they have customers in their system, they're using tried and true customer satisfaction, meet customer expectations type models. You know, how do we deliver very high satisfaction? They have historically been a leader in satisfaction for online retailers. And they use that to meet customer expectations and retain customers. So quality, satisfaction, loyalty. So they use some very tried and true techniques, but on top of all that, they have literally trillions of data points. They are applying, you know, machine learning, AI tools, which in their simplest form are predictive models on a massive scale that they're applying to this. So it's not like anyone starting at a smaller scale can't emulate some of what they do, because they're doing the basic blocking and tackling of marketing. But they're doing it with data analytics that are on steroids. And, you know, from a portfolio standpoint, and they may not even say they're doing this, but you could look at them through the lens of portfolio, and they're doing sort of the four basic aspects, sort of managerial aspects of portfolio management very well. During the height of their growth, they had a compound growth rate of over 20% of new customers in their portfolio. They were adding 20% new customers a year. They were constantly moving. We go back to our discussion of relationships. They've moved over 200 million of those customers to be Prime members. There's some controversy around that, but, you know, they've been very successful at that. Once they create those relationships, We talked about the advantage of having those close relationships is you have lower marketing costs. I am so embedded in the Apple system, as some of you may also be, that when they offered an Apple AirTag, I bought it like that. They didn't even have to advertise it, right? So when you have these costs, you've got bundling and cross-selling opportunities. So Amazon has just built its product categories over time, and they defend those relationships very well. They deliver high satisfaction. So to me, Amazon's a great example of something old, something new, that, we can all learn from and reinforce some very classic models that they use by being very customer focused.
Laura, what other things from Amazon have you seen really work in your experience?
Yeah, I think, that idea of they revolutionized efficiency and transactional efficiency and created a new expectation for consumers, right? If it doesn't come, within a few days, it feels like an eternity. That was not an expectation even a few years ago. So I think that's, now this new bar that I think brands have to be, they are already aware of it, but how do you then kind of at least get to a standard of being in the consideration set of being, on time or relatively quick? But then, so there's like this transactional baseline that I think is maybe hard to achieve, but needed. But then I think, a lot of brands can ask themselves, how can I curate an assortment that feels really relevant to my consumer, right? Amazon has all of this choice, which is wonderful and can be at times overwhelming depending on why you're shopping, right? You're shopping at Amazon for in a certain way, but you're not, I don't know many people who are necessarily browsing on Amazon, right? It's become a search engine. People say, I use Amazon like I use Google. You're typing in for something specific and you find it and you purchase and it comes quickly to you. So then brands may ask themselves, okay, so if that's that shopping path, and there are others, but that's a big one for Amazon, why do people come to me? What am I offering that's different than that? And I think that's important to think about. So I think that's something that I think brands can learn and also kind of reflect in them, do some self-reflection about then what do they want to be in this space.
Excellent add-on. Kelly, any additional things also that you've seen work for you based on some of Amazon's success?
I think Michael and Laura touched on what they do so well, right? Amazon is maniacal about the customer. Everything they do in the customer journey, from the first time you touch them to every message you get in every path that they put you on, they're just really focused and clear on who they're solving for. And they also are asking themselves, what are we trying to solve? When they started, they were looking for KPIs and metrics that really help them define how does that make sure that the customer has the best experience in the journey that we're taking. And I think that's something that we can all learn from. And I think to Laura's point too, there is that piece of, if I take that from them, they built their competitive advantage to get you product as quickly as possible with the least amount of clicks in your journey and give you the breadth of product offering as they built to go. And I think that is something that is very customer centric because it's clear what they stand for, what you get from them, and how you're going to get it. And that's something that creates that competitive advantage for a brand. And how do you make sure that you know what that is for your brand, right? How do you know why you do what you do, how you do what you do for your customer base, and what makes you unique in a very saturated marketplace when we look at the retail segment across, CPG to apparel to any product that people are purchasing, there's a lot of competition and small brands that are starting up coming out of COVID because everybody, there's the creator culture that's happening. And that's something that you have to think about and make sure that you're communicating that with the customer, whether they're friends or acquaintances or partners, and get them to be partners, to Michael's terms.
So if I can follow what Kelly's saying, you're touching on something very important, which is how you create a competitive advantage in this space. and how Amazon's doing that. One of the things we talk about with service and service retail firms is there isn't any one thing that any of us does that's quote unquote unique. It couldn't be copied, right? And there's a economist named Michael Porter wrote a very good article a number of years ago called "What is Strategy?" And his first point is, well, strategy is about saying no, what you're not going to do. But he also goes into this notion of service firms. He was looking at companies like IKEA, and he was looking at financial service firms, and saying it's really how you take these different links in the customer journey and link them together, these little different parts in the journey, and link them together. So if you look at all the things like, for example, if we go back to the IKEA example, all the steps that a customer goes through in interacting with IKEA at various stages in the process. And you think, well, if I'm Wayfair and I come into this business, can I copy that in the next year? Well, let's say the probability is 80%. Well, IKEA spent 70 years linking these activities. There's literally 30 of them. Or more. You start calculating the probability of replicating that system, that service system, and it's 0.8 times 0.8 times 0.8 times 0.8. Eventually, it falls to close to 0. And that was Porter's point. And we're seeing that. You got these companies like Amazon and IKEA that Amazon's now been around for a few decades. And, it's very hard to copy. It's, companies have to decide, am I going to go work with them, or am I going to do something on the niche side and not work with them? Very few brands have been able to break out of the Amazon orbit, and you have to be as strong as a Nike to be able to do it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Kelly, it looks like you have a fan out there. You have a Torrid fan. So even on this platform, say to you, I'm going to just say it out loud because we have one of the participants say is a Torrid fan. They've worn your brand for years, best work pants ever. And she's on a Facebook group that's Torrid customers sharing reviews and outfit ideas from the clothes, and gets a lot of ideas from that group. So look, even in here, we're having this way to be customer centric and to engage with our customers. So just as a reminder, if you have a question or comment, please use either the QA box that's at the bottom of the screen, or you can use the chat function as well. This is so fun. See, I love our little side chat here. But there was another question that came in, and it is sort of a nice question. Maybe this is how we wrap things today. I don't know if we get any more questions, but can you just share, just maybe give us one example of a really great success story that when you use a customer-centric marketing strategy?
I can use one from my recent experience, and as a merchant, right, we own product strategy and line assortment, and we do continually ask, what problems is my customer facing and how can we solve them? And so in my background, I had a customer base that really loved a polished look, right? Loved a traditional khaki, button-down shirt. And the expectation for those clothes weren't necessarily that they were comfortable, but they looked professional. They were well pulled together, classic look. And the market continually is introducing stretch and comfort and synthetic materials, but that's not something that necessarily fits. It's comfortable, but doesn't necessarily fit in a traditional khaki, right? So we thought, but that's interesting. How do we kind of, you get off, right? Everybody does this. You get home from work, you kind of take off those work clothes and you get into your lounge clothes. Well, what if we created a pant that they didn't feel the need to kind of change, right? That's versatile, that can give you a polish of a khaki, the ease of a jean, and that has comfort in it so that you don't feel like you're just waiting to kind of get this thing off. And so we introduced this pant, and we made sure when we were developing it, what's the fit? How's the fit going to look? How does he like to have it fit for him? What words are we going to use to communicate this that's in his language so that it's not confusing? And we also want to make sure he knows it's not like a workout pant, and it's not quite a khaki, and it's not quite a jean, right? It's this kind of, what is this thing? It's new. So that's kind of confusing. How do you make sure that that's clear? So we spent a lot of time thinking this through and researching as a team. And we made sure when we launched this product that we were communicating it in channels that he consumes, and made sure that we had used his language. And it was an entirely incremental program. We had just amazing success with it, right? Because it solved a problem, he understood it, and we continued to show him ways that he can wear it, how it can blend into your existing wardrobe. And it was a total unlock. But again, it started with knowing who our customer is, what they want, and also solving a problem and kind of creating this new concept that wasn't in their mind before. It was exciting too. I mean, when you have those moments, when you have a business, I mean, it is awesome to hear customer feedback, to see the sales response. It was a true team effort across probably 30 people, right? To design it, to build it, to develop it, to sell it. I love those times. Those are fun times.
That is a great story, and I love it because that's like almost all I buy for my son now. He's in high school. He wants something that looks polished, but he's all about comfort. So that's amazing. Now I know where it came from. Thank you, Laura. Kelly, how about you? What's a good story that you have seen where this has really worked?
You know, I think to Laura's point, it's when the story, it's when the product, the marketing, the message for the consumer comes together. And that's really, you know, creating the right funnel to bring the product to life. And I think, you know, I'm excited to hear about that for Laura. We had similar experiences at Dockers, launching product that did that. And then, you know, at times at Gap, I'll go back. This is going to take me far back, but I was in the baby business, and, you know, we were looking for what the opportunity was to serve that customer in the digital space. This was earlier in the digital universe, and really seeing how we meet that customer need. And, you know, through exploration and just kind of looking at the market and trying to understand and know more about our customer, we created a product line that, you know, we thought was going to be somewhat small. And it ended up turning into something, as we messaged it and got it into the customer's hands, that became a little bit bigger than we thought. It went to more spaces. It kind of started to do its own thing. And so those are the moments where you go, wow, this is great. This isn't even the customer segment we were looking to target. It went a whole different place. And we now have something new that we can build off of, that we can think about, that we can kind of change our perspective and our perception of what we think the customer is going to do. Because that's something I don't feel like we talked about a little bit, but, you know, we take all of this data, we take a strategy, we take what we think is going to happen. And when you put it in the hands of your customer, they tell you what it's going to do. And it's up to us to determine how we respond to that, right? Do we follow their path, or do we keep trying to force them down a path that they're like, no, we're taking it over here, you know? And sometimes it's better to get on board because it opens up new things and new ideas that can generate, you know, extra value to the customer and their lifetime value with your brand, but also to your business, and to your satisfaction of the work that you do and what you deliver.
Awesome. Michael, you want to bring us home with your success story that you've seen this work? How you've seen this work?
Sure. Well, I have to comment. Laura and Kelly are sort of describing my Lululemon ABC pants, which now has competition.
Right? Yes, it does.
Oh, and because I've been through that same dilemma that Laura was talking about. I don't have to take them. I don't have to change. They're comfortable.
Right.
To this idea of understanding your relationship with the customer and how we use that. We were doing some work with this was a home building materials retailer. It was a European brand, but you know, you can think of, you know, in terms of a Home Depot type of retail outlet. And we started simply by developing a segmentation scheme for understanding what was the strength of the relationship with the brand. And we used two simple variables. And this was based on, you know, working with the management team to understanding what they were comfortable with and what they could work with. And so we looked at the brand preference. In other words, did the consumer see this brand as better than other brands in the market? Or did they see it as equal or worse than? A very simple question. And we looked at share of wallet. How much of was the consumer spending at this retailer versus other retailers in the same market? And we used those two variables to be able to find partners, friends, and acquaintances. So to be a partner or a friend, you had to have a brand preference. To be a partner, you had to have over 50% share of wallet. What was interesting is we had high volume acquaintances. We had people who thought this brand is no better or worse than other brands, but we're buying most of the stuff from them, usually because of price or availability. It was simply a convenience factor, right? And what we then did is we plotted the share of friends and partners versus acquaintances across the 30 stores in the retail chain. And the variance was unbelievable. I mean, the best stores in the chain, which were the most profitable stores, had 80–90% friends and partners. The poorest performing stores had 10 to 12%. You know, so then once the management team had that information, you know, they could start saying, okay, what are we doing at these stores that we're not doing at those stores? They could, you know, take best practices from, and they were getting the same marketing materials, you know, the same plans. But in some cases, it was as simple as taking managers from the better performing stores and putting them in the lower performing stores to start improving that environment, the culture in the store, the service ethos. And it made a tremendous difference in the value of their customer portfolios, and sales started to grow. They were never going to be able to completely change the competitive part, but they could certainly change the customer service part and sort of what they were doing to improve satisfaction in the stores. So that was one of the more recent retail examples that we've had.
Thank you. Well, this has been really fun. I completely have loved learning more about each of these sections. I think for me, it's been interesting to think about the intentionality around this conversation around customer centricity, the authenticity around this concept, and really just about how we develop those relationships. How do we build those relationships so we are being intentional and authentic with our customers and our clients? So this has been so fun. I really want to thank Kelly, Laura, Michael for your time. This has been amazing. As we wrap up, I just want to thank you on behalf of CPAD and let you know that we are here to help you adapt your customer-centric marketing strategies to help you meet challenging customer needs and consumer trends in this really interesting environment and climate that we're all living in. So I'd love the opportunity to set up time to talk with you and talk about any custom consulting or coaching. Both Michael and Laura are there to teach and to be able to be great resources for you on campus. And we have a lot of fans of Kelly's, so I'm sure Kelly will come help us out too if we can convince her. But it is all about how, anytime, good. It's all about how we can continue to grow this community. I wanted to thank you for your time today. We have many opportunities to engage in our Badger community like this, and I just want to make sure that I'm able to give this to you and bring this all together, this really great environment. So thank you. My email is there on the slide. If you want to connect with me further, I'm happy to make these connections with any of our panelists today. But thank you so much for your time today. Enjoy, and let's get some customers. Take care.
Thank you.